Elden Ring is an incredible experience. Words can hardly describe how much I've been enjoying the countless hours I've put in so far, but that's just my opinion, of course. Like everyone else on the internet, I took so long to make a video on it because I've been playing it pretty much non-stop. Now if you're a fan of Dark Souls, Bloodborne, or any of the other FromSoft games, it's obviously right up your alley. But even if you aren't, the hype around Elden Ring has brought in a huge amount of completely new players. Watching the community basically explode over the past week has been pretty entertaining. There's tons of helpful tips, cool fan art, and dumb memes flooding the internet daily. But a common question I see people bring up is if Elden Ring is actually the best introduction to the series for new players. I've seen a lot of interesting points and arguments being made so far on Twitter, Reddit, and otherwise, so I thought I'd look into them a little deeper. We can already see lots of new players jumping in on the hype and being sorely disappointed that the game just isn't for them. That's totally fine, not everyone's gonna like it. But would they have been better off starting with a Souls game first? What about Bloodborne? Maybe even Sekiro? For the sake of this video, I'll keep my discussion to the games I just mentioned. Throwing in their older games like Kingsfield or Armored Core would just make any attempt at this a complete mess. Whether you're looking to get your friends into the series or have never even touched a Souls game yourself, I think I can provide some insight on where to get started. And don't worry, I'm going to keep this video as spoiler free as possible, mostly just showing some early game areas and some cool visuals here and there when it's appropriate. Difficulty is always the main talking point every time a new FromSoft game comes out. Should their games be more accessible? Is an easy mode better for bringing in new people? Do they lose artistic value by adding additional modes? Is the core purpose of the game to provide a challenge to overcome? Do people play their games exclusively for the story? All questions that have been argued over 1,000 times before. There's nothing new or interesting to add to that discussion, so I'm not going to derail the video going into it. But the point is, difficulty is a core part of their games, while also being a major deterrent for certain types of players. Like I said before, not everyone has to like their games, and offering the easiest game as a starting point won't necessarily hook the most people. But that's kind of beside the point. Is Elden Ring actually their easiest game? Well, that's hard to define. There's certainly a ton of difficulty to be found in Elden Ring. Judging by Twitter, I've been seeing tons of people raging about the first major story boss, Market. While there are a lot of potential bosses before that point, they're all skippable. Thus the technical first boss is more like a mid-game boss in any of their other titles. Players who didn't engage much with the open world content and went straight through the story will have a pretty hard time. This could definitely be seen as purposeful design. They use both this boss and the surrounding castle as a funnel point the player must pass to unlock the next chunk of the map. But they don't want players just rushing through the story, so they put up a significant challenge. This forces players to turn around and go explore the rest of the open world, better preparing for the trials ahead. While their past titles often put up challenging bosses and optional routes, they almost never blocked the main storyline with encounters that were far more difficult than the ones before. It's a very different approach, but it works quite well with the open world design. Not only will new players experience a lot more content this way, they'll also get a good grasp on the mechanics from the large variety of content available right at the start. You could think of this first venture into the open world as an extended tutorial for new players. They're eased into the game with challenges they may fail countless times at, but still have a good shot at eventually making it through. Contrast this to the other FromSoft titles, where the difficulty may pick up more gradually from boss to boss, but the player is much more limited in their alternatives. In many cases, there are only 1 or 2 bosses available to fight in the Souls games. If you're completely stuck on both of them, the only option is to start grinding, either by leveling up or throwing yourself at the boss countless times over. In the case of Sekiro, it could be even worse. While you can level up and gain new abilities, it's not like any of their other games where you're directly increasing your stats. New abilities allow you to tackle fights differently, but you're not going to overwhelm bosses by grinding for hours. This makes Sekiro potentially the most difficult when you hit a dead end on a boss. Eventually you're just going to have to figure out the fight or give up entirely. These dead end points are a major gripe for new players, causing the classic rage quits the series is so well known for. Elden Ring still has bosses that are just as difficult, but if you get stuck you can always go off and do 50 other things. We could get all the way down to the minor details of every last boss and their mechanics, but I wouldn't say Elden Ring is leagues harder or easier than any of their past games. The main difference is in how many tools the player has to deal with the difficulty. Aside from just exploring the world, Elden Ring has a handful of new features that offer up additional ways to tackle each boss. The Spirit Calling Bell is a great example, allowing players to summon in NPCs they've collected to help them fight. Similar to summoning other players, it's just another tool that you can choose to use or ignore. With a much wider variety of options at your disposal than any of their previous games, it's a lot more likely that players can figure out a playstyle that works for them. So is it their hardest game? Well, maybe, if you're strictly trying to rush through the story bosses, but if you take your time and engage with all the systems available, it could be the easiest to get through. It's definitely their biggest and longest game by far, but they do a great job of respecting your time and rewarding whatever you choose to do with it. While difficulty and game design are the main talking points around all of FromSoft's games, they're obviously not the only thing. In terms of visuals, Elden Ring is pretty amazing. The landscapes, architecture, and sprawling vistas you find around every corner are nearly unmatched. Not since Breath of the Wild have I been so impressed by just looking over the edge of a cliff and seeing the massive, beautiful world stretched out below. It's very rare for me to just stop and marvel at game landscapes, but I find myself doing it constantly in Elden Ring. Their past games have had some great views and unique visuals, but this one is definitely their biggest accomplishment yet. If we're talking about the theme, Elden Ring fits most closely to the sword and sorcery fantasy world of Dark Souls. Lots of people like that, but many prefer the Victorian Gothic look of Bloodborne, while others like the mystical ancient Japan themes in Sekiro. I think this all comes down to personal preference, since each of their games executes on their settings and visuals excellently. Curiously, George R.R. Martin, the creator of Game of Thrones, contributed to the world building in some way, but as of now, nobody knows exactly what he wrote. Regardless, there's a lot of medieval fantasy topics in the game that share similarities with his work, which is enough of a selling point for some fans of his. I could honestly go on and on about this game, but there's already a mountain of reviews out there, so I don't need to add even more to the pile. If you're watching this, you've likely already played Elden Ring, plan on playing it, or just enjoy arguing about FromSoft games on the internet. But if you're looking to suggest a first game to introduce a friend to the series, I think Elden Ring is an excellent choice. It's challenging, mysterious, beautiful, and just a joy to play all around. It may not be their easiest game, but it offers the widest variety of choices and playstyles to cater to almost any taste. You'll get stuck, you'll die a lot, and you'll probably even get frustrated at times. When you finally beat that tough boss that was giving you hell, it might just be all worth it. At least, it is for most of us. But I'd like to hear what you think. Have you been enjoying Elden Ring so far? What was your first FromSoft game? Which one did you have the most trouble with? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, I've got a whole catalog of long-form videos about game design and some occasionally goofy stuff you could go through. As always, feel free to subscribe if you want to help support the channel. Either way, I appreciate you sticking around until the end, and I hope to see you all in the next one.